Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nathalie Errard. I'm the head of EU Affairs for Airbus, and I'm delighted to welcome you today for our event on decarbonisation of aviation. So we will speak a lot about technologies and roadmap, but I want to remind you that as Airbus, the European leader of aerospace and defense, and now a global leader, we are very aware of the young generation aspiration towards sustainable aviation. We have no magic spell, but we want to lead that journey towards decarbonization. And we are working in parallel on different streams. The first one is obviously about the renewal of fleet. More than 75% of the current worldwide fleet are old generation aircraft. And you know they are consuming 20 to 25% more than the new generation. Then we need improvement on operation, and we count on you so that air traffic management, for example, gets the 10% improvement of CO2 reduction that we would like to get. Then we have sustainable aviation fuel coupled with incremental improvement of our aircraft. That's going to be here for the very short term and for the long term. And our aircraft are already certified for 50% blend of sustainable aviation fuel with kerosene. Over the life cycle, it's an 80% improvement thanks to sustainable aviation fuel use. And then last but not least, we have the disruptive part, and we have the ZEROe program that we're going to talk a lot about today, because we talked a lot about SAF in the past during various events, and they are very strategic to us. But we wanted to bring a bit more clarity about what we want to do. That is why we'll have a panel on decarbonization, but that before that, Llewellyn, our VP pre-program ZEROe, will be happy to give you an overview. Thank you very much for coming and joining online, and I hope you find this event informative and gives you some inspiration about the future of aviation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nathalie. And in fact, I've gone too far. Thank you, Nathalie. It's great to be with you this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about what we're doing at Airbus and specifically what we're doing on ZEROe. You'll hear from my accent perhaps that I'm an Irish guy. I'm an Irish guy with a British wife living in Toulouse with 3 children born in France. And I see a huge value in being able to physically connect across countries, across regions. But I'm very aware that if we want to be able to provide that service in the future, we need to eliminate or get very close to eliminating aviation's climate impact. And that's what we are focused on doing at Airbus. This image is an image of a genuine concept aircraft, which we're working on at Airbus. It's a fuel cell propulsion powered aircraft. So it means it can be considered as a fully electric commercial aircraft. Instead of a battery, we're talking about hydrogen storage and fuel cells to create the electricity, which then powers electric motors. Of course, like Nathalie says, we're not just focused on hydrogen, with the ambition, like it says in the middle, to be the first aircraft manufacturer to bring a large-scale commercial hydrogen-powered aircraft to service by 2035. We're also focused on sustainable aviation fuel, bringing all of our existing products to 100% compatibility with sustainable aviation fuel by 2030, and making sure, therefore, that the aircraft technology is not a bottleneck to the implementation and deployment of sustainable aviation fuel. It's worth noting that already our aircraft, our products are compatible with the up to 50% mix of sustainable aviation fuel, and it's in some ways a real shame that that technology capability is not used today. In terms of hydrogen, there are several ways to use it on board. The previous image of the fuel cell powered aircraft is about hydrogen fuel cells on board the aircraft consuming hydrogen and turning it into electricity, which powers electric motors. But there are other reasons aviation is interested in hydrogen. Hydrogen combustion also looks feasible. It's in fact something that's been done in the past. In the US, there were flights in the 1950s where hydrogen was combusted on board an aircraft. The Russians have done it in the 1980s. Both of those reasons are completely different than the reasons we're interested in hydrogen today. They were military or energy security reasons. Now we're interested in hydrogen because simply hydrogen has the possibility to have the best climate impact compared to every other option which we could imagine in terms of energy carrier. And of course, power to liquid synthetic fuel, which is a sustainable aviation fuel, is compatible already with the existing fleet up to 50%, is another very important way that we will need to use hydrogen in the future. This is a representation, what we call a digital mock-up of the targeted fuel cell propulsion system. What you can see are these vertical lines in the middle, which are the fuel cell stacks. The fuel cell stacks, very similar to what we have in the automotive, trucking, or even maritime sector, but we're working on taking that performance to an elevated level for commercial aviation applications. Those fuel cells then provide electricity to motor control units, electric motors, and then drive a gearbox, which in turn turns the propeller or fan on that aircraft. To the rear of the engine, we're talking about thermal management system. We need to keep the fuel cells operating at a temperature between 80 degrees Celsius and about 110 degrees Celsius. So we need to make sure that the thermal management of that system is operating correctly. It's a very, very different propulsion system compared to what we have on existing aircraft. And of course, on top of the climate opportunities, there are other opportunities in terms of how it can reshape the supply chain around engine technology of the future. What you've seen up until now are concepts, designs, which we're working on, but I think it's really important for you to understand that there's much more to that in the activities which we're doing at Airbus. These are images of the tests which have been underway over the last few years to test the technology after we've developed it to higher performance level than what exists at state of the art. On the left hand of your screen, what you're looking at are fuel cell stack testing. The fuel cells are coming out of a joint venture which we created in 2020. The fuel cell joint venture is really important for us. It's taking technology which has been state of the art in the automotive sector to a higher performance level, higher efficiency, higher operating temperature in order for us to achieve the performance that we need on a commercial aircraft application. As well as the fuel cell stacks, the next part of our testing is around the fuel cell propulsion system. In the middle of the screen, we show the test facility, which has over the summer already achieved 1.2 megawatts of power generation. 1.2 megawatts is equivalent to one engine on the 6-engine aircraft we saw on one of the first slides. So we're already ground testing the equivalent power level of a commercial aircraft fuel cell powered engine. On the right-hand side, especially towards the bottom right, we're doing a lot around additive layer manufacturing, looking at how we can integrate all of these different systems into an engine, make it much more compact than perhaps what we would need to do on a ground transportation application in order to reduce the drag, reduce the mass, and achieve the sort of performance levels we're targeting. As well as the ground testing, which we saw on the previous slide, one of the key enablers for us is the flight test demonstrators, which we've also started developing. We have 2 in the pipeline, both using the A380 as a flight test platform. In this image, what we see is the fuel cell propulsion system attached to the upper deck at the rear of the aircraft. Inside the aircraft, there will be liquid hydrogen storage. The other demonstrator, using the same platform, will test hydrogen combustion in flight. And I guess looking at what we're doing both on ground now, what we're planning on doing in flight with these demonstrators in the 2026-2028 timeframe, hopefully you understand how committed and serious we are to developing the technologies, testing them in real conditions on our route to getting a commercial entry into service by 2035. Some of the preparation for that flight testing has already started. The refueling systems for the flight test platform, the design of that we're already working on. We've already started looking at how the cockpit interface, for example, changes in order to be able to operate a hydrogen-powered fuel system and propulsion system in flight. And then, of course, everything I've just said is really important, the product, the technology, but in fact, the other key ingredient to the success of this project is decarbonized hydrogen. And if we had that product today without the decarbonized hydrogen, in fact, it wouldn't be much use to anybody. So we're putting a lot of focus in developing what we call launch clusters. Launch clusters will essentially be the first locations where we enter into service a ZEROe aircraft, and they will have criteria like relatively low cost of decarbonized liquid hydrogen, favorable regulation, and of course, a market for such an aircraft in terms of customers who want to operate it. We're partnering with energy providers, with airports, and in some cases, airlines in order to deep dive on these locations and understand where we'll have the most favorable conditions in the 2035 timeframe, so we can then focus our activity on creating those conditions in terms of hydrogen supply at the airport. So various elements that we need to succeed on. Of course, the technology development and demonstration. We need to secure H2 hydrogen at the right cost. We need regulation and standardization in order to make this also a reality. For example, simple things like refueling standard, the ability to store hydrogen at airports. These kind of maybe seemingly basic things are going to be really critical for the overall success. And then, of course, the deployment, the physical deployment of the infrastructure, which has a certain lead time and is going to be crucially important for the success. My view is that Airbus can't do this on its own. It's an extremely exciting ambition, one that I'm really happy to be part of. But in fact, many of you and your colleagues across Brussels are going to be key in enabling this sort of project to be successful. I would now welcome Sean to help moderate the panel, which is the next agenda item. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed, Glenn. Yeah, so my name is Sean Goulding Carroll. I'm a journalist covering transport and environment issues for Euractiv, the EU policy media, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. You're all very welcome. Thank you for joining us here in person, and thank you also to those of you who are online. Just for your panel discussion, and the audience will be able to ask questions as well. Those in the room, when the time comes, simply raise your hand. We have a bit of tech support here first. Perfect. Hopefully you can hear me better now. I won't repeat everything I've just said, but yeah, suffice to say, you're all very welcome and thank you for joining. So today's event is titled Towards the Decarbonisation of the Aviation Sector. It's hosted by Public Affairs Bruxelles. And it's kindly supported. I mean, affordable air travel has revolutionized connectivity in Europe, making our continent more accessible than at any point in history. But whilst air travel has a myriad of undeniable benefits, it also has a climate cost. According to EU statistics, aviation accounts for around 3.8% of total CO2 emissions in the EU. And as the effects of climate change become increasingly apparent, policymakers and industry have turned their attention to reducing emissions from air travel. Major pieces of legislation were put forward to reduce the climate impact of flying, including Refuel EU Aviation, a green jet fuel mandate, and the EU also require industry to pay more under the EU's aviation carbon market, the emission trading system, at least for flights in Europe at the moment. At the same time, industry has made major strides in bringing to market cleaner aircraft, including planes with CO2 neutral propulsion systems, such as small electric aircraft, and as Glenn has presented, hydrogen-powered aircraft. So are we on track to meet aviation's decarbonisation goal? And what does the clean aviation sector of the future look like? Well, we'll be discussing that and much more during our debate today. Maybe just to mention for those online, you can submit your questions for the panelists using Slido. If you go to the Slido website, or if you have the Slido app, you enter the hashtag #NetZeroAviation, very fitting, and you'll be able to contribute. Those in the room, simply raise your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you. I'd now like to invite our panelists to join me on the stage. Thank you very much. Help yourself to water as well. I'm delighted to be joined by you. Thank you so much for being here in person with me. Maybe just to briefly introduce who everyone here is. I'm very happy to be joined by Rachel Smit, who is a member of Cabinet of the European Commissioner for Transport, Adina Vălean, where she is primarily responsible for aviation policy. To my right, Damien Meadows, the acting head of the European Commission's unit responsible for the international carbon market, aviation and maritime in DG CLIMA. MEP Jan-Christoph Oetjen, a lawmaker with the Liberal Renew Group in the European Parliament and the Vice Chair of the Transport and Tourism Committee. And of course, you know Glenn Llewellyn, who, as previously mentioned, is the Vice President of Zero-Emission Aircraft at Airbus. Thank you again for being here with me. Glenn, I'd like to start with you, just kind of building on what you've presented. So, I mean, it's hugely exciting to have these kind of zero-emission aircraft on the horizon. And it seems like, you know, we're basically in a race against time when it comes to the climate crisis. So when are we going to see these not just launch, but become mainstream? When do you think they're going to really start to become something that every traveler is going to use?
And I think that's an important question. So we've highlighted that our ambition is to bring this aircraft to commercial service by 2035. And the big question we're asking ourselves is, okay, imagine we bring it to service and it's available. How successful will it be? Will the public, will the societal expectation, the regulatory expectation be so favorable that that kind of aircraft, imagine we're successful with a fully electric commercial powered aircraft, that aircraft has, you know, huge success, that it becomes in fact one of the major and most successful products that Airbus is delivering to the market because there's just such huge appetite for it? Or are we going to be delivering into a world where maybe it's just certain parts of Europe or certain parts of the world that are excited to be flying with zero climate impact, and in fact other parts of the world are less excited about that proposition? And I think that's something that this room can influence. You know, we can influence the success ultimately of these kind of products. We all know that flying with these sort of decarbonized solutions, whether it's sustainable aviation fuel or hydrogen, it's going to cost more, and we're going to need to regulate favorably to make them successful. And as we're a global company, we need help to make sure that there's a global business case for such products. We don't want this just to be, for example, a European story.
Well, I do want to come back to the kind of regulatory framework that you would need. But I mean, of course, there are other measures in place at the moment to decarbonize aviation. Rachel, maybe I can ask you. So the EU has obviously put in place a kind of a mandatory requirement to use sustainable aviation fuels under Refuel EU Aviation. But what I've heard is that there's some concern that the targets may be too ambitious, that it'll be difficult to meet these targets. Can you tell us a bit more about Refuel EU Aviation, and are you confident that the targets will be met?
Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Glenn, for the presentation and the explanations. I thought that they were very interesting. But indeed, yeah, we're not quite there yet. It's very exciting. I think the progress that you're making on hydrogen as a propulsion system, and 2035 is, is a very ambitious date. But as you said, this is sort of the first commercial to the market, and we have a fleet of maybe 20,000, I think, aircraft around the world. So what do we do with that fleet in the meantime? And that's why, for the short and medium term, our focus has been on sustainable aviation fuels. This is really, for us, the only way that we can decarbonize aviation in the short term. And that's why we put forward this Refuel Aviation proposal, regulation now adopted. The idea being that we're still reliant 99% on kerosene, 99.9% I'd say, and the SAF market is there, but for aviation it's that there's not enough SAF to fuel aviation even for one day. So we really needed to kickstart that production and that uptake, and that's the goal of Refuel EU. Obviously, we know that it's very costly, and we know that the production isn't there yet. So we have set mandatory targets, but we've gone quite gradually. We aim for 2% sustainable aviation fuel supply across European airports by 2025, scaling up to 20% in 2035, and all the way to 70% in 2050. And then we have targets, sub-targets also for the most scalable and the fuels that we see as the most future-proof, which are the synthetic fuels. Here, I mean, this is something that's non-existent now. So we start also very slow. It's less than 1% in 2030 and scaling up. But yeah, so the idea is that we're setting these targets on the fuel suppliers in airports. So any aircraft departing the EU would have to uplift fuels containing SAF, and this will kickstart the production. Of course, as you said, there are a lot of questions about whether we'll actually have the supply of SAF. Airlines are very concerned about this. Also, that will influence the price, obviously. Some studies show that we need maybe 7 additional SAF plants in Europe by 2030 and up to 100 by 2050. Other studies say many more. So we know that this is a challenge. We're working to put in place support measures across the board to support production, that we have, for example, set up a Renewable and Low Carbon Fuels Alliance, where we're trying to bring the whole sector together to create a pipeline of projects that can be financed and to have some matchmaking of producers and investors in Europe to develop SAF production. And obviously we have a lot of financial tools, whether it's the Innovation Fund, Horizon for the research. So we're really trying to use all of those tools to create a favorable industrial framework. And as I said, the targets are gradual, so we still remain confident that we can get there.
Thank you. Maybe just to pick on something that you said, you mentioned about opening new plants in Europe. One of the key decarbonisation fuels will be e-fuels or synthetic fuels. What I've heard is that much of this, though, will probably take place outside of Europe, such as in Morocco, where they have lots of sunshine. We've already seen it in an e-fuel factory in Peru, I believe it is. Is it the case that a lot of the kind of fuels that we'll need will be created outside of Europe?
Well, we're hoping that e-fuels and sustainable fuels will be produced all over the world ultimately. But obviously, we have set ourselves mandates, and there will be penalties if we don't meet those mandates. Our goal is obviously to encourage production in the EU and to create these new growth markets in the EU. It's clear that there are, countries with abundant renewable resources that also have an edge when it comes to the production of those types of resources. Of fuels, but we see that there is production starting in the EU. We have countries where there are also renewable resources. It's not only about solar. There's also hydropower. There's also carbon capture down the road. So I mean, there are a lot of different technological pathways that are being explored, and there are a lot of investments going into research and demonstration projects already in Europe.
Thank you. Well, Damien, I'd like to ask you about another mechanism the EU is using to reduce emissions from aviation, and that is, of course, the ETS, the carbon market. Could you tell us a bit about how this works and what you believe the impact will be on aviation emissions as we go forward into the future?
Sure, thanks, Sean. I mean, the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, she's very clear that carbon must have a price, every sector must contribute. And over the last 18 years, the EU emissions trading system, initially inspired by American ideas of doing it across the US there, this has developed to be an effective tool to reduce emissions. Emissions in Europe from sectors covered by carbon pricing have reduced by, I think, 37% since the year 2005, while the economy has grown enormously. So living in a market economy, I mean, the whole way I've worked over 20 years is using market forces to take us where we need to go. And this is needed with a carbon price. Now, aviation is a tiny part of the EU ETS, I think about 5% of it. I mean, when you look at projects such as the carbon capture, direct air capture in Iceland, or hybrid steel in Sweden, these projects are happening because they have an incentive from the EU emissions trading system. And they also have financial support from the emission trading system through this 100% funded innovation fund. So I won't, if anybody wants to spend hours on the ETS, happy, but basically it delivers low cost reductions, that's its whole purpose. But the revenues are used to bring more expensive technologies on stream. And this has been a development over the last decade, which I think shows great promise. I mean, what Glenn said is very promising for the future. And in terms of what you had on your slides about the need for support outside, I think around 4 billion euros from the EU ETS is going to green hydrogen, to batteries, to electrolyzers, to renewables already. And come this November, we're going to have another big call for proposals to address all of aviation's climate effects. So I think without carbon pricing, we're not going to achieve the limitation of 1.5 degrees centigrade. I absolutely agree we need the rest of the world acting here. I mean, my Commissioner Hoekstra was in Brazil last week where they're developing an emissions trading system. The Chinese emissions trading system should cover aviation as well. We need action outside of Europe, but within Europe, carbon pricing is helping aviation get to where it needs to be. And I mean, the carbon price, when you fly within Europe since 2012, I think the carbon price, if you were to fly from Brussels to southern Spain, is around 8 euros. It's much less than passenger duties in some member states. And it's directly delivering emission reductions. I mean, efficient airlines pay less because they're combusting less fuel while taking passengers and cargo. It's essentially, I guess, a key instrument for reducing emissions cost effectively, because the alternative fuels do cost more. And I think the Green Deal works across the board here because the emissions trading system is bringing down the price of sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen if it's used. Here, I would just highlight one mechanism, although Mr. Oetjen, you were a father of this mechanism. But little noticed is that the EU ETS has around 1.6 billion euro to pay for alternative fuels, first come, first served, from the 1st of January 2024. So basically in 3 months' time, for airlines that use alternative fuels. And this can cover 100% of the remaining cost difference. So what I'm seeing when I talk to airlines and other stakeholders is an enormous amount of activity, because if the regulatory system is funding the cost difference, then it makes it that much more attractive to move towards the mandate or exceed the mandate. So I think we are on a pathway there. There's a long, long way to go, but carbon pricing is a big element of actually achieving this.
Thank you. Well, MEP Oetjen, I'd also be interested to hear your thoughts on ETS, but maybe just another question to put to you. So over time, ETS, we mentioned a price of €8 was mentioned in terms of the extra costs for passengers. Refuel EU, the new SAFs will also be more expensive. Do you think people, travelers, are willing to pay more to fly if it means that it's a cleaner journey?
Good question. I don't know yet, to be very honest, because we see that there are some people, I mean, airlines already do this, right? I mean, they have on a voluntary basis mechanisms to compensate, etc. But this is not clicked very often, to be very frank. So I don't see this happening on a broad range. But ultimately, I think people want to go on holiday, they want to fly, they want to move around, and this still will be valid even if the price is going up. And let's be very honest. It's not necessary to fly around Europe for €20, and this is not the price a product should have. I know that a lot of people in the aviation sector don't like when I say this, but this is still my belief. And I think carbon pricing indeed is the best way forward to make alternatives more viable. And as Damien just mentioned, our big fear was, or is perhaps even still, that the investment in the production of SAF is not happening, because we need the companies to start investing, building up production, and my fear was, will this really happen? And is the just the mandate which we have in refuel aviation enough, and the pricing that goes up with ETS? And that's why we created this this mechanism of SAF allowances, which rewards first movers. And clearly, I think with the two regulations in place now, there should be investments. And I know that the industry, so this is the fuel industry, they are interested in investing, but they have the feeling that it's not so that there's no certainty of the companies picking up, etc., and where does this go? Because they want to sell their products, right? And at the end, they don't care what they sell if it's bought by the airlines. So I think that that the framework is there, the environment is there for investments to happen, but they need still to happen. So I hope that that we will see movement on this and cooperation between airlines on the one hand and fuel producers on the other hand. But I mean, we still have, even in refuel aviation, some work to do. I mean, we have the proposal on book and claim, which has still to be filled with life, because we don't know if everywhere the production of SAF will appear in the same way, in the same time. Do we do with a blending so that the jet fuel that you take is automatically with the right amount? Is this available everywhere or not? And if it's not available, how do we do it? And that's why we proposed this book and claim system, in order to say, okay, if we don't get it there, we can buy it somewhere else, and so you can in a way compensate this, or have it mathematically the right percentage. But there's still a lot to do, and a lot of framework to set. And at the moment, with high energy prices, people are scared. I mean, let's face it. And this is not only industry; this is our consumers as well. They're scared about high prices, and they don't know what they can afford in the future. But at the same time, we see that they are still flying. They're still going on a holiday, perhaps a day shorter or two. Perhaps they change the destination. They don't go to Italy where it's expensive, but they go to Turkey. But they still fly because they want to go on holiday. And I'm very sure that this will be the same in the future.
Thank you. Just a quick note from our online viewers. Some people are struggling to hear, so if we can keep our microphones close to our mouths. Actually, maybe just to pick up on something you mentioned there, MEP Oetjen. You mentioned that people maybe would be flying to Turkey, and this is a fear from the aviation industry, as I understand it, that these type of extra regulations, extra costs would make the EU aviation industry less competitive. People could be going to, Turkey is a good example, I think. Are you concerned about perhaps a loss of competitiveness of the EU aviation industry?
Well, my example was of people going on holiday somewhere else than to the European Union. What you mentioned is using hubs outside Europe because of the cost. So this is a problem for Air France, for KLM, for Lufthansa, not so much for those who do the holiday flights like, I don't know, well, I don't want to do publicity for someone. So you can all imagine. So yes, this is really a fear that is there. And that's why I think we have to address this on an international level. I mean, you are right by saying this is something we have to address globally. And we have global mechanisms. Aviation is an international business. And so the best way to address this is on the global level with the international organizations like ICAO and the CORSIA system and so on. So there we shall move on. The question is what happens if we don't get results from there that are satisfactory from a political point of view in Europe. And that's something where we will have to, well, how to say, we will have the next fight probably in the European Parliament and between different DGs and commissioners and so on, how to address this on the one hand. And the other hand is that we have to, I think that in the next mandate, the question of competitiveness of European industry will be at the core of the political landscape. There will be a new Commission president, maybe it's the same, but I know that she can change the language and the aims after an election. I know her for a long time. And it's not only her deciding, it's the whole college deciding and the whole way forward discussed with the member states, etc. And I think, I mean, when we started the discussion on Green Deal, the war in Ukraine was not foreseen. The high energy prices have not been foreseen. And I think this will be taken into account in a certain way or another after the elections. And I think that this question of carbon leakage, but at the end, it's a way of carbon leakage if they go via Istanbul to Japan or via the Gulf states to Japan instead of using a European hub, has to be addressed as well in a way.
Thank you. Glenn, I'd like to ask you about the type of support that you need to make these hydrogen planes a reality from a regulatory standpoint. I understand, I mean, we mentioned some of the ETS funds are going into funding innovations. Do you feel you're getting the kind of regulatory support that you need from the EU and national level?
I think there's a lot of really good work going on, and some of the colleagues here have already touched on it. What's happening in Refuel EU, these incentives that are being put in place to use different fuels. You know, maybe it seems strange for an industrial to say it, but we're fully behind that. We support it. We were even encouraging higher percentages of sustainable aviation fuel to be legislated than what finally got legislated. So we really support that. And the reason we support it, as I guess maybe you saw in some of what I was presenting, we take a fairly long-term perspective on things. We're already, because of our development cycle, the technology timeline, we're already thinking about what's going to be necessary in the 2030s and the 2040s, and we expect that we need to decarbonize aviation in order to continue, like I said earlier, being able to offer this social service of being able to physically connect across countries and regions. So we really support what's started. I think where we've got to be careful, and it comes back to competitivity of Europe, is that we need to be really, I think, making sure we have the right balance in between incentives and penalties. Incentives encourage innovation, encourage development. Penalties will somehow potentially damage our competitiveness. And I think that's something we really need to keep an eye on. We've seen how the US has legislated for things differently, and I think we're going to have to keep a really close eye on this and make sure that we take this massive opportunity, which I think started in Europe, which is taking a leading position on decarbonisation, taking a leading position in some of the decarbonisation technologies. We can keep that, but we're going to have to be careful about how we regulate to keep it. I think what's going on in terms of the scale up of renewables is really important. We need decarbonized hydrogen in the sort of quantities that would support an aviation usage of that kind of fuel. We need aviation to be considered as a hard to abate sector that comes as a priority usage, way before using hydrogen for home heating, for example, as in some areas is discussed. We need activity to happen on a global scale. I think Europe has a huge amount of influence, activity to happen at a global scale so that we have this business case at a global level for these kind of solutions. We're talking about tens of billions of investment that companies like Airbus, and it'll be the same for other companies, need to make to put game-changing solutions on the market. We can only do that if we have business cases, and those business cases have to be supported for sure by European regulation, but also by global regulation. So whatever we can do on the world stage is going to be really important. And then, there's huge amounts already happening, but we need to keep doing it in terms of preparing the ecosystem for regulation and standardization of hydrogen usage, liquid hydrogen transportation, liquid hydrogen storage, liquid hydrogen refueling. That's, if you don't have that, you don't have a viable product. So things that might seem quite simple are super, super important.
Yes, please. I would like to ask a question. Sorry, that's not my role perhaps, but I'm interested. I really wish you good luck. And I'm not an engineer, so I don't understand nothing. I just know that you're working on something which might be a revolution for aviation. But my question would be, if you produce the aircraft, well, fine. Then you need to sell it. You say that's what you meant. You need a business case, but those who buy it need a business case as well. So in a way, you need airlines buying the aircrafts that will use it on their network. So in this network has to be hydrogen ready. I don't see us being prepared for this if your aircraft comes 2035, because all the airports need to do the investment. How big will the aircraft be? So which routes will be for which routes this will be used? Is this more the smaller airports? Then investment in hydrogen technology will be even more critical because they have not the money like Fraport or Aéroport de Paris. So where do you see this? Where can we help from a political point of view? Because you have 2 proposing laws and 1 voting laws here. So where do you see our role there?
Yeah, so the hydrogen infrastructure challenge could seem like a very daunting one, right? If you consider how many airports are in the world and you think, God, we're going to transition to hydrogen tomorrow in 2035, isn't that just too much? We can't make hydrogen available at all airports in 2035. Therefore, let's stop the ambition, right? I'm not saying you said it, but other people sometimes think like that. And what we see from our analysis is that to support 12 years of production of this kind of aircraft, we need about 150 airports equipped and capable of refueling hydrogen. 150 airports is a lot, because that's 150 more than 0 airports which have hydrogen today. But on the other hand, it's a global number, and it's a lot less than the number of hydrogen refueling stations that AFIR is telling us we need to have on the ground transportation network. So I guess it's important to highlight that, yes, it's going to be challenging, but it's also feasible in terms of number at a global scale. And a lot of the work that we're doing now, the map of the world I showed with energy providers, airports, sometimes regional governments, airlines, that activity is heavily focused on understanding exactly what the supply chain of decarbonized hydrogen is going to be into airports, what is actually going to be the cost of decarbonized liquid hydrogen at the refueling station. And what's sure is airlines will want a sort of turnkey solution. So they'll want something where they don't have to worry about the hydrogen supply. So we're going to have to continue some of the partnerships which we've started in working with them to be able to provide hydrogen into these different airports. But at the moment, the scale of the challenge looks achievable. The day one of this entry into service will be one airport. Day two will still be one airport, because there'll probably be a lot of aircraft delivered into one single, let's say, launch cluster. There are clever things we can do which are much easier to do in aviation than in trucking, for example.
But you need at least 2 airports.
Not necessarily, right? Not necessarily. So if we design the aircraft to be able to go out and back, then we only need one airport. We need to be able to cope with the scenario where maybe there's a diversion for whatever reason. But if we design the aircraft to be able to go out and back, that's actually providing. That's making it a lot easier in terms of infrastructure challenge. And I know many people have perhaps heard of tankering with sustainable aviation fuel. With hydrogen, you don't have that problem. Hydrogen is very light, and so you're not actually consuming much more energy for tankering fuel and reducing the amount of refuel required.
Maybe just to pick up on this point of the infrastructure that's needed, Damien, maybe I can ask you. So obviously this is going to have a certain cost in terms of making sure Europe can actually supply the infrastructure required. Liquid hydrogen, I understand, needs to be kept at a very low temperature. How do you think that's going in terms of Europe's preparedness? And I'm curious to know what you think about who should pay for this as well. Should it be the airports, the fuel makers, the airlines? What do you think?
Sure. Well, I think Glenn pointed to what's happening. I mean, in terms of carrots and sticks, with the Inflation Reduction Act, I think the pendulum swung towards carrots. And this is where, I mean, this 1.6 billion is available for hydrogen as well. I hear from some airlines, they don't think 1.6 billion gets you a lot of alternative fuels. If you manage to use that up, fantastic. I mean, we have a new debate, as Mr. Oetjen said, in 3 years' time. And as long as we're going down the path of carrots, there can be more carrots for this. That's an aviation-specific element. I mean, under the ETS generally, this innovation fund of 40 billion euros or so is as oversubscribed as Harvard. I mean, 23 calls for every euro available. So I'm not sure we're in the position where we'd be building hydrogen infrastructure for an airport yet, because the danger is building white elephants. I mean, across the economy, we see huge amounts of exciting stuff happening, and whatever you read in the press, generally these projects are funded from the EU emissions trading system, and the Parliament even stuck a new chapter in the law on visibility to oblige the companies to actually tell the public that they're getting funding from carbon pricing. So I think we're moving in the direction Glenn was talking about with infrastructure, but more for shipping right now, because there's a lot of talk of green corridors. And the Innovation Fund, Parliament introduced an interesting twist that the Innovation Fund can fund activities outside of Europe where there's European added value. This is a first, because when Rachel spoke about the production, clearly it's great to have this production in Europe, and ETS is paying for refineries for SAF in Sweden and e-fuels with Norsk e-fuel, I think, in Norway. But clearly, I think if you've got two airports using hydrogen, it would be ideal if one of them was in the United States. And this potential for green corridors is there in European legislation for shipping. And as we move forward in time, I think Europe can work with other parts of the world, knowing that we're richer, more advanced than a lot of the world, to help them have the infrastructure that they need. It's an iterative process, but we can get there.
Jan-Christoph, would you like to add to that? No? Okay. Then maybe, Rachel, I can ask you. There's been a lot of discussion tonight about the need to act not just at the European level, but at the international level to make these type of regulations that we're seeing, to have them, if not embraced, but it's something similar at international level. How do you see that discussion? I mean, we've seen some controversy over the ETS, but do you think there's the same desire internationally to decarbonize aviation that we see in Europe?
Thank you. I will get back to that. I just wanted to comment on the infrastructure question. I think it's going to be a very big, we're going to have to reflect on this a lot going forward indeed, because I mean, we're busy creating a whole new market for SAF. We're busy setting ourselves targets. We see SAF, covering at least 70% of fuel needs by 2050. It's a drop in fuel, so it doesn't require the new infrastructure in airports, so it's fairly easy. So obviously there will need to be a reflection, and I think probably we have these reflections with our Trans-European Transport Network and Energy Network reflections on where we need to make the energy and transport infrastructure investments, and I think probably as part of that mapping exercise going forward, we'll have to build in where we would have sort of hydrogen dedicated airports, and what are the range of those aircraft, and there would have to be some smart reflection about it, because I mean it's also a question back as will hydrogen planes sort of take over in the future, or will we have a mix of aircraft and mixture of different fuels? So I think it's definitely a question for the future, but at this stage I think we need to think about it, but we're not there yet, and so our idea is to focus on SAF. Now, going to the international level, I think we were very happy with the movement last year at ICAO with the agreement on a long-term aspirational goal of net zero. It shows that things are moving on the international level. It shows that there is a desire to decarbonize, and understanding that this needs to happen. We have a high-level conference coming up in November, just before the COP, on sustainable aviation fuels. So here the idea is to say, we have the net zero ambition. How does that translate into sustainable aviation fuels? Can we set ourselves some targets also on an international level? Now, of course, we know that there's pushback against targets. Not every country has the same means to invest in these technologies, so this discussion is happening. But what we do see is that even the big players who generally tend to push back against climate targets recognize that SAF is an economic opportunity, and most of them want to be part of it. So we do see that there is a chance. We have to see how this is formulated, but of moving everyone along to investing in SAF going forward, and hopefully that will help to level the playing field. I mean, we already see big partners like the US, etc., investing also in SAF, so that helps to level the global playing field. It helps on questions like carbon leakage, as we were discussing earlier as well. So.
Thank you. Maybe Glenn, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on the kind of future mix that we'll be seeing. Do you see it as, I mean, we've heard solutions being SAF, hydrogen, perhaps electric. How do you see the future mix?
Hybrid, yeah, so somewhere in there. So our analysis tells us that hydrogen is relevant in what we call the first generation of hydrogen technologies for aviation. Hydrogen is relevant all the way up from general aviation through to 100 and 200 seat aircraft, 1,000 to 2,000 nautical miles. So that's what we call the short medium range market segment. It's basically everything which is intra-European. That's the total coverage we see with generation one of the hydrogen technology. 2,000 nautical miles, just to give you an idea of what that represents in terms of fuel usage globally. In 2019, 58% of fuel was used on missions of 2,000 nautical miles or less. Okay, so it's in terms of fleet, it's a significant opportunity when you consider hydrogen. And why are we talking about hydrogen and SAF and the complexity that you sort of suggested, Rachel, where we're talking about being able to refuel, have a logistics chain for sustainable aviation fuel, and we're talking about having a logistics chain for hydrogen. And the reason is that hydrogen looks like it's got extremely interesting climate credentials, and it also looks like it has the potential to use overall less energy, and we think energy is going to be a key topic when we move into the 2030s and 2040s. And it also has the potential, depending on cost, so we're going to have to see which ecosystem moves faster. Is it going to be the sustainable aviation fuel ecosystem, or is it going to be the hydrogen ecosystem? But if hydrogen starts to become a commodity over time, hydrogen will be potentially a cheaper way to eliminate your climate impact than maybe sustainable aviation fuel. Now, don't understand that I'm advocating for hydrogen instead of sustainable aviation fuel. We need both. We need both because of what Rachel said. The existing fleet is compatible with it, and in the future, we'll take pressure off of the sustainable aviation fuel deployment if we can have hydrogen usage as well. So they're really complementary in our view.
Just you mentioned there about taking the pressure off sustainable aviation fuel. Of course, in the short term, a lot of the sustainable aviation fuels that will be used will be based on biofuels, advanced biofuels, primarily from, as I understand it, used cooking oil. Of course, recently in the media, there's been some reports about potential fraud for used cooking oil, particularly those imported from Asia. Rachel, maybe I can ask you, are you worried about these kind of reports of fraud that we're hearing? And do you think it could undermine the use of SAF in a general sense?
We've heard a lot about this, but I think that when we were crafting Refuel EU and RED as well, I mean, we've paid a lot of attention to the types of fuels that can be qualified as sustainable for usage here in the EU, and also to the certification processes that will have to be applied. So all in all, we think that this is something that will be managed thanks to the traceability requirements and certification requirements that will be imposed.
Thanks. And maybe just something that I thought I'd ask about. Of course, they say with car journeys, the most sustainable journey is the one you don't make. And we've seen somewhat of a movement to kind of restrict flights in France. If there's a rail option, in Sweden, there's this flight chain movement. Maybe Jan-Christoph, I can ask you, do you think these calls to fly less, given that we're in a climate crisis and where we are now with decarbonisation, do we need to fly less in the short term at least until we have these zero emission options on the table?
Well, honestly, my aim politically would be to have all modes of transport decarbonized so that it doesn't matter which mode of transport you take. And I mean, I think there are some very populistic proposals in the room when it comes to flight shaming. And so I don't like to discuss this. Yes, we have to make it better, but it's a social question as well. I mean, I'm coming from northern Germany. People need sun sometimes and need to go on holiday and need to, yeah, but I mean, this is reality, right? And I think it's a societal question as well, surely, that we need to accompany a movement that it becomes that you have less climate impact of all of this. But I think if you, I don't know how to say, if you screw too much, people will just have the opposite position, and we end up nowhere. So I think we have to do it in a way that society accepts as well this way forward, so that I mean, this gradual changes that we introduce from a political perspective, I think it's the right way to do, because people get used to it. I mean, you all see when you buy ice cream, right? And you all know that when you were young, it was much cheaper than today. But you are getting used to it, and so this is because it became gradually more expensive. If it jumps from 50 cents to 150, you say, well, I don't buy it, but you still buy ice cream because you like ice cream and because was a gradual raise of the price. And that's, I think it's important that we do this greening of transport and of our society and of our economy in a way that it's there's no disruptive for the people. I know that, I mean, sometimes disruptive technologies are good because it's just a jump, but for the people it has to be smooth, and that's important, I think.
Thank you. Yes, Rachel.
No, just because Jan-Christoph mentioned holidays, but I mean, Glenn comes from Ireland, and you know, there are many islands that can only be reached by air transport. So it's a question of connectivity. You can't, I mean, individuals may choose to fly less, but you can't ban individuals from flying. And some of these measures, as you said, rather populistic, but also sometimes could be counterproductive. I mean, they're often targeting short haul, or, you know, the business aviation we see, it comes back regularly. But these are often the short haul flights, the ones that are the easiest to decarbonize. And so they actually sometimes the most innovative and the ones that will come forward with breakthrough technologies that can then be rolled out to the broader aviation ecosystem. And finally, if you're you know, limiting flights, you're also limiting the sector's investment capacity, financial capacity to invest in decarbonizing. So for us, the approach that we've taken, the Fit for 55 approach, incentivizing decarbonization is the right approach.
Thank you. And I mean, I'm from the same island as Glenn, so it would be difficult if you couldn't fly for me. I'd like to now take some questions from the audience. Yes, I see Laurent. We can get a microphone to you now.
Yep, thank you, Laurent Doncel for Airlines for Europe, A4E. I'd like to go back to the point that we were making earlier about hydrogen and access to hydrogen, because we know that if the challenge about accessing the energy is not going to be so much now between now and 2030, because most of the mandate and the SAF we'll use is going to be biogenic and possibly capacity freed from the road transport, that possibly after 2030, the question about hydrogen first used in the form of the RFNBO and then post 2035 in one of the Airbus future aircraft, hopefully, is much more problematic. One of the points that was made earlier was about the question of the aviation sector being hard to abate and possibly harder than other modes of transport. I would like to ask maybe all the panelists this question about the prioritization of the aviation sector. Is that something that we all agree? And if that is the case, do we also agree that maybe there should be an exclusive use for the aviation sectors? And there was recently a discussion about whether some of the net zero technologies for which the Parliament is voting tomorrow and then in Strasbourg next month, about whether it should be limited for certain types of use. I think it would be interesting to hear whether we agree on this, and if that's the case, whether more could be done indeed to prioritize these hard to abate sectors, aviation being one of them.
Thank you. Who would like to take that question? Rachel.
Look, I think we all agree that the aviation/maritime are hard to abate sectors. They are clearly, I mean, they're clearly a priority. Of course, it's visible. It's visible in the targets that are set on CO2 standards for cars and heavy-duty vehicles. There we foresee a phase out of fuels for road in the near term. So I know that there are still very political discussions about this, which I won't enter into, but clearly we know that the massive part of e-fuels will be needed for aviation and will be prioritized for aviation and maritime going forward, and that's also the purpose of this renewable and low carbon fuels alliance that we've set up to really facilitate that. We're also, we're also very happy that SAF have been recognized in the Net Zero Industry Act. We think this is an important signal going forward. That we had a lot of discussions because it's we were told zero emission technologies only. Now I think there's a broader understanding that for these sectors like aviation, we need these transitional technologies, and 70% is a huge reduction in terms of CO2 reductions for aviation. So I think there is broader understanding. It's taking a while to get everybody on board, but we're getting there.
Jan-Christoph.
Yeah, just shortly, Laurent, hi. I think there are two parts. There's the CEF part, where I think we have done our homework, right? It's mentioned in NZIA. We have the tools for sustainable aviation fuels to be built up on production capacity, etc., etc. This is the one part, and I don't think that you need prioritization, right? I don't know. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean. Because this is a chemical process. It's like today, when you produce kerosene, you have all the other drop-in fuels that are produced as well. These will go on the market. You have a market situation, and I don't like to interfere into markets too much. I'm a liberal. Sorry, it's in the DNA. The other thing is what will be with hydrogen, and there we don't know yet. I would very much like that this happens, but it's not on the market yet. Hydrogen economy is not there yet. How will green steel evolve and other big energy consumption industries? We don't know yet. So I think this is something we will have to discuss at the end of the 20s, how this new hydrogen economy will be set up. The question will be as well, and there's still an open question between the member states. Is this all do the same hydrogen, or is the French nuclear hydrogen less good than the German based on only green energy hydrogen? Etc., etc. So there's so many open questions which I will not answer today. That I think there's no valid response to your question. But in a way, I think that those sectors where it's very hard to decarbonize and where hydrogen might be the real difference, and this might be even steel more than aviation. I don't know today. I just don't know. I think there should be, in a way, guidance, and we discussed this earlier. We're always technology neutral, etc., but in a way, we guide it to certain industries, and I think this is the proper way to do it.
Thank you, Damien. I believe you.
Sorry for being long.
I think that enables me to be short. The Commission approach has been to use markets and not just to say all of this is reserved for you, because that can lead to regulatory capture. And here, the Parliament gave guidance because when it comes to e-fuels, while being technologically neutral, there's a choice. Is the cement plant producing the CO2, if it puts it into a fuel, treated as zero emission? Or is the airline, when they use the e-fuel, treated as zero emission? And the Parliament's given a strong indication for the e-fuel when used by airlines to be treated as zero emission, even though it has carbon content. And I think the way that SAF is treated in the ETS as well, where it's zero rated if it's sustainable. I mean, it gives strong indications in this direction, which favors aviation. I mean, the cement companies are not happy with this, but somewhere in the system you need integrity, or else what you mentioned about fraud. I mean, the ETS has had brushes with fraud before. These are extremely worrying. They have to be addressed. Credibility of the regulator is key. So only one person can get credit for an e-fuel. And I think that's likely to be aviation that gets that credit.
Thank you. Are there any further comments from the panel? If not, then we can take further questions from here in the room, if there are any. If not, we can take some questions online. So I have a question here from Emil Melchior Engard. Apologies if I got your name wrong. It says, what is the agenda for the green airport infrastructure? Moreover, which fuels for SAF is favored? And lastly, what is the long-term goal for hydrogen hubs at airports? I believe we've addressed this to a degree, but is anyone who would like to comment on this question?
Perhaps just shortly from my perspective. I mean, for SAF, you don't need an alternative infrastructure because it's the same infrastructure like jet fuel today. On hydrogen, this is different, and we had a slight appetite of the debate when we discussed AFIR, where you had some amendments tabled that airports should be hydrogen ready at a certain point. And all friends, I mean, we are all friends in the aviation sector, right? So all friends from the airports said, no, don't write it because we don't know yet. I think, but it will be regulated by AFIA, I think, at the end in a certain way that if we go this way, that there has to be obligation to big infrastructures to be ready. Point.
Perhaps another word about the hydrogen hubs at airports. I think many people consider airports as places where airplanes go, of course, but they're actually more than that. Often they're cargo hubs, so a lot of trucking is going into airports. There are, of course, passenger hubs. There are lots of buses going to airports or public transport in general. A lot of the discussions we've been having with airports across the world is that there are opportunities to decarbonize some of the ground transportation, which is getting to and from airports with hydrogen in the short term. And what we've been doing in some cases is building with them a plan of deployment of hydrogen for the ground-based activities to start the scaling up and get ready for hydrogen usage on the airport side for aircraft in the 2030s. So I think that's been a really interesting outcome of some of the discussions we've been having with those guys over the last couple of years.
Thank you. Glenn, there's another question here for you. There's no name attached to it, but it says, can Airbus's commitment to introduce a hydrogen commercial aircraft by 2035 set the trend for other virtuous examples in the aviation industry? Do you have any thoughts on that?
We would love to see other people trying to solve the same problem statement as we are. I think our European context perhaps is making it very clear that we should be pushing for solutions which have the lowest possible and maybe even zero climate impact. We are certainly addressing that, and we're investing huge amounts in making that possible. But we would like not to be alone. I think it's great to be a leader, but it would also be good to have followers, and it will certainly help with the infrastructure question if it's not just Airbus aircraft, but there are also other aircraft that also need to be supplied. The sort of scale helps with the cost side of things as well as the infrastructure deployment side of things. So we would love to see other players coming in this direction. While at the same time, we're keen to keep our leadership position on this topic. And we think that that will allow us as a business to differentiate and to have, real business benefit in the 2030s and 40s with these kind of value propositions.
Thank you. Rachel, there's a question for you. It says, how do you see the competition for access and usage of renewable and low carbon fuels, strong push from the producers for co-processing.
So, sorry, the competition for renewable.
Yeah, how do you see the competition for access and usage of renewable and low carbon fuels?
Well, I see there's going to be, there is already strong competition for access to those fuels, because there's very, very limited quantities of those fuels. So we see it already. The amounts that are being marketed are already being fully bought up, despite the fact that the prices are actually still very high compared to kerosene, which is already also very high right now. So no, definitely very strong competition, which will of course be stimulated also by the targets under Refuel EU once they set in. And so the issue really is to ramp up the production so that we can meet the targets. And on co-processing, this is some of the discussions that we've had under Refuel EU. There is an opening towards that, but I mean, the regulation is adopted now. There are still some delegated acts that need to be finalized, and we're still discussing the finer details of what can be accounted for as an e-fuel. I think that discussion will be ongoing, and you know, this will always be, because we're regulating something new and many of these technologies are not on the market yet. This will always be evolving, and that's why we have in all of these regulations, we have the review clauses, whether it's in Refuel EU or whether it's in AFIR. So we'll be looking again at this in 2 years' time, and then again down the road. So,
thank you. I believe we have a question in the room. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Nuzabe from FTI Consulting. And my question is linked to what you just said, Ms. Smit. You mentioned that it could be useful to work on renewable fuel alliances. How do you imagine it working with the competition law rules in the European Union? Because that kind of alliances can go off the record very rapidly, let's say.
Well, right now, what we've put in place is this industry alliance where we have all partners from across the value chain, and I mean, the idea is that they can present projects, and we create this database basically of different actors and projects. And it's more of a matchmaking instance where, and if you know, an investor or a chemical producer or a company is wanting to also take a risk and invest in this project, then they'll come together and they'll discuss their investments. And this kind of alliance is also looking at sort of the regulatory framework and the ecosystem more generally, and then what needs to be done to unlock investments with the financial institutions and things like that. So it's not sort of an alliance in the sense of competition law. Of course, I mean, we've seen in the past with other alliances, like the Battery Alliance, that these have led, I mean, here it's sort of bottom up, and these have led also to more top-down initiatives where we identify projects of common European interest, and then there is a special framework under competition law so that, you know, we can facilitate state aid as well for these types of projects. We're not there yet with the Fuels Alliance, but you know, it's only been there for a year. We're seeing how things evolve with this pipeline of projects that will be now set up, and then we'll see down the road how that can go.
Thank you. Any further questions in the room? Yes, this gentleman here.
Thank you very much, Mate Boite from the European Business Aviation Association. First of all, thank you very much to all the panelists for sharing your views. Especially, we'd like to take appreciation for thanking you, especially the comment that short-haul flight, the solution for decarbonization is definitely not to ban short-haul flights, and definitely not to restrict other operators, including business aviation or cargo operators. And my question is actually related to that. and regarding RefuelEU, and what would be your message to those operators, let it be business aviation operators or cargo operators that do not fall, let's say, under the Union Airport definition in terms of the airports they use, and what could be the solution for them to access SAF, and that's obviously very much related to the flexibility mechanism and the future book and claim. So we'd be interested to know your views on that. And also, I just read actually about a T&E guide that just came out about the do's and don'ts and the guide towards SAF. And they actually, in that report, claim that that these biofuels really compete with food security. There are concerns really about the sustainability of these biofuels, and might even have the impression there that well, SAF is not really supported in certain, let's say, aspects. So what would be your response to that guide as well? Thank you.
Maybe I could just provide a partial answer. I think other colleagues might be able to give a more full one. What I presented earlier is potentially a zero or very close to zero climate impact aircraft. Many people are thinking, well, you know, let's prioritize trains, let's prioritize cars instead of aviation. I'd just like to highlight that if we're successful with the zero climate impact aircraft, in terms of overall life cycle, when you look at the embedded CO2, the concrete, the infrastructure needed, aviation starts to be extremely interesting, even for short haul, short range flights in terms of overall life cycle, because airport infrastructure is actually quite light, very flexible, compared to other types of ground-based infrastructure. So I think there's potentially a sort of new era of aviation even if you can get to zero climate impact, because certainly when you compare it from a life cycle perspective, it starts to get very, very exciting.
Thank you. Would other panelists like to respond?
Well, on the RefuelEU question, I think my answer can be very simple, and it's opt-in. Use the flexibility mechanism to opt-in. We're counting on general aviation as well to be part of this. We know there are not the smaller operators don't necessarily fall under the scope, but there is this opt-in mechanism, and we hope to see that ambition also in business aviation. Yeah, I think
And I would add that we are waiting for a proposal from Commission on book and claim, because this will be the key for those, especially for those airports which are where we cannot buy it, to compensate via other airports. So that's why at the end there was a majority as well on introducing this system, even though we did not have the perfect draft of it, because I mean, when you try to put in place such a complicated mechanism, you need the competence of the Commission, because we don't have it in the Parliament and they don't have it on the Council side. But at the end, I think this will be an important tool as well in order to bring on board.
Maybe if I can just have add a word here, because I mean, with proper carbon pricing, you shouldn't have these moral issues against flying, whether it's short distance or whether it's business aviation. We're in the situation we're in 2023. In the ETS revision, it wasn't possible to give this 1.6 billion support for the cost difference for alternative fuels to business jets. It's reserved specifically for commercial aviation, because if you remember in the press, I mean, well, the image of ETS paying for billionaires to fill up their business jets wouldn't have gone down very well. So that's not an avenue for commercial aviation, general aviation right now. But I would say that you're fully eligible for the Innovation Fund. I mean, what Jan-Christoph said about the potential for innovation in smaller aircraft clearly is there. And even innovation prizes I've heard airlines call for, all this can be done. So I think business aviation, if it could actually pave the way towards the future that Glenn's been describing, then it can solve an image issue as well as practically sort of really helping with the scaling up.
Thank you. I realize we have limited time, but we have one last question in the room, I believe.
I have two, if you don't mind. Very quick anyway.
Very quickly,
Cosimo Matti from BCW Consulting here in Brussels. One question regards the role of carbon removals that you see applying to aviation. We haven't spoken about this quite a lot, but with the industrial carbon management strategy coming up next year, how do you see the role of aviation fitting into all of this? And also with the revision of the EU ETS, how do you see carbon removal becoming more of a central piece into the legislation? And the last question to Glenn, regarding the, how do you tackle as Airbus the role of the potential issue of hydrogen leakage, as it may have quite a substantial climate impact? So if you can elaborate on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Damien, please.
Thanks. I'm spending a couple of hours a week on carbon removal, stroke, temporary storage, carbon capture and utilization, so happy to answer that. I mean, it's clear that we need removals to happen at scale. This is moving forward. It's very complicated. I'm happy to talk afterwards more on particularly the carbon capture and utilization and plastics and things like this. But what I said earlier, I mean, we have projects around Europe, in Iceland, for direct air capture, for geological sequestration. All of this is happening now. It's generally very expensive and small scale. So with a carbon price of 80 euros, no one's going to rely solely on that to do it. And I think it's hugely important it goes forward. We have a review clause in 2026 to look at how the emissions trading system can encourage this more strongly. And I'm absolutely confident we'll get there. What I sometimes lack, I guess, is the connection to aviation, because unless Glenn can explain, we're not going to have carbon capture and storage happening from an aircraft itself. So this comes to the sort of, I'm paying you to abate rather than me. And economically, this can make sense, but it can also be an excuse for doing nothing. So you can see a bit of a backlash right now against carbon storage, saying this is a get out of jail free card. I'm not sure that's a helpful dynamic to be appearing, because we need the removals, but we also need the hydrogen aircraft, and we need the abatement. I mean, having worked on climate for 20 years, it's pretty damn depressing seeing what's happening, and we need all of these things to happen. So an absolute yes to removals. I guess with carbon pricing, aviation can be paying for removals as well, but we need the abatement as well. I mean, we need to reduce emissions economy-wide.
Thank you. And just looking at the time, Glenn, I believe this will be the final question, so I'll give you the floor.
Okay, maybe just one point on the removals. I think we should be scaling up removals significantly right now. You can imagine it tapering so that, you know, over time it becomes less of the mix of solutions in order to avoiding doing something else. So that would be my 2 pennies worth on that subject. In terms of leakage, I'm glad you raised it. It's a point probably that we're not discussing enough. We have to be sure in the overall hydrogen ecosystem that there is not a problem of leakage, which sort of undermines the whole value chain. It's unlikely that that will happen, but it needs to be regulated. It needs to have penalties or incentives in place to make sure that we don't end up with hydrogen leakage. On the aircraft side, I think all of our safety requirements are driving us to basically zero leakage solutions on board the aircraft. So my main concern would be about the value chain from, you know, electrolyzer all the way through to transportation and to a certain extent refueling. But yeah, definitely an important topic that has to be addressed. It can be addressed, we just need to have the right approach to do it.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we could discuss these topics for another hour, 2 hours, 4 hours. But unfortunately, we are running out of time, so we will need to come to our concluding remarks here. Maybe just before we end, if we could have a round of applause for our panelists, please. So, I mean, that brings us to the close of today's conference, but I would like to thank all of our panelists for their excellent contributions. Thank you to Airbus for supporting today's debate. And of course, thank you to you, both here in the room and those joining us online as well. That's all for now, but we look forward to seeing you at the next Pub Affairs Bruxelles debate. Thank you and take care.